Thank you, thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Webster, because he's from Texas. Most of the immigration is coming through Texas, is it not?
Currently, yes.
And are most of those immigrants staying in Texas?
There are a lot of them staying in Texas, but they are routing throughout the country. It's affecting the whole nation.
But are most of them staying in Texas?
No.
Where are they going to?
Well, you'd have to ask each one of them where they're going.
I don't have time for that. You should have an idea.
I do know that the mayor of New York has expressed concerns about how many are arriving in his city, so there's a lot there.
Either Governor DeSantis or your governor have put them on airplanes and sent them to New York, buses, airplanes, whatever, and sent them to Chicago and sent them to Denver. Other than those those vacation tours that your governors have planned, where are these people going?
Well, you'd have to ask the Biden administration. They also bus individuals and fly individuals into the interior. Also, the local cities do as well. San Antonio, El Paso have all bused and brought people out of Texas, out of their cities.
I would suspect most of them are staying in Texas, more than any other state. And yet I read these proposals by certain Republicans, and Mr. Roy kind of got into it as well, that by mentioning Ms. Clark, that the Democrats allegedly are all in favor of the immigration folks, people coming into our country, because they want them to come into their districts for the census in 2030 to get more Congress people and more money. But most of the people are staying in Texas. And so it seems like Texas would get the congressman and Texas would get the money. So it doesn't make any sense that these states, and in fact, New York doesn't want them, and Chicago doesn't want them, Denver doesn't want them, so they're obviously not caring about the 2030 census. Is it Jadwat? Have you heard these theories about the 2030 census and the reason the Democrats are doing this?
This is actually new to me.
It's new. Well, I read it. Marsha Blackburn, one of my senators, wrote that you might wonder why Democrats want to leave our border open. Explanation is straightforward. Blue states know they're on track to lose congressional seats and federal tax dollars when the next census is tabulated. By taking in undocumented immigrants who count toward the census population, Democrat-run states can help offset these losses and retain their congressional seats and federal funding. Is that loony?
It seems far-fetched to me.
And most of the immigrants are staying in the red states, Texas and Arizona, and I guess they go to California. I mean, why not? I mean, that's blue state. Anyway, neither here nor there. The main thing about this hearing, which is astonishing to me, is we've got a bill in the Senate that they're working on, which will be the most comprehensive reform of border security ever. President Biden has said that he will sign it and he will close the border. That's what I think the Republicans want. That's what I think they've campaigned on. But now Mr. Trump doesn't want that to happen. So when he talks to Speaker Johnson, he tells him, stop that bill. We don't want to have an immigration bill because it might help Joe Biden say, I've worked on the immigration crisis and I've helped stem it. So instead of working to help our country and stop the invasion, there's an invasion on our southern border. But we don't want to stop the invasion until Mr. Trump gets the chance to deal with his border issue. And we all know what Mr. Trump's border issue is. It's the security fences around the prison that he's going to go to if he doesn't get elected president. That's his border issue. He doesn't want to have to deal with that border. And for that reason, we're going to let the invasion on the southern part of our country continue. Let all these people come in who are raping our women and cheating our friends and doing all these terrible things and ripping off veterans. We're going to let that happen until Mr. Trump can see to it that he doesn't go to the big house with the borders that he fears. It's just insane that we don't look after our country, which we should, and we should encourage the Senate, which they would do, to pass their bill. Mr. McConnell says it's the best bill they'll ever have. So does Lindsey Graham. Quite a few Republican senators are working on this. Langford, they all want to pass it, and they say they're going to get a much better bill than if they wait till the next administration, if there is a next administration, that this will be the best bill possible. And you always know the legislation is evolutionary. So you accept a bill. Anyway, this is just, we need to focus on the real issues, which is passing a border bill, protecting our border, protecting our country, and that would be passing a bill that the Senate has, which is a good bill, and getting it in the House and passing it here and not listening to Mr. Trump. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman from Tennessee. I'll now.
Okay, you can have 5.
I'll take 4. Thank you. I didn't really understand the answer to that question. How much more money does the Coast Guard need than what they were appropriated? You've been asked to do cybersecurity. You've got the awareness of bridges and other infrastructure vulnerable to massive ships and other forces. How much money do you need to protect the American maritime system beyond what you're getting?
Here's your chance. Don't blow it.
Congressman, as my colleague mentioned, the fiscal 24 budget that was approved since we last appeared before the committee, and then the president's budget that's been presented for next year, and then looking ahead to 2033, Commandant Fagan has been clear about the current roughly $13 billion Coast Guard being a $20 billion Coast Guard, and looking at a 3 to 5% increase in operating and maintenance funds annually. We've said that publicly in order to meet those requirements, all those requirements you listed, sir, and many others. To be specific about cyber, my area of responsibility, I would tell you that we are meeting the current demand signal, but there's no doubt, I think, anyone has, that that cyber threats are increasing. Our increasing use of automation is creating more vulnerability, and so if we are asked to do more, if the required level of effort is going to go up, then the required level of resources would need to go up with it. So we will be responsible in asking for what we need as those responsibilities increase.
Either of y'all want to comment on this?
Congressman, Commandant's been very clear that the status quo is a risk position that we're in right now. Staying steady state does not give the Coast Guard the readiness to be able to meet emerging demands and future demands. And so the President's budget has a prioritized list of critical assets and critical funding support that will allow us to not only continue to restore readiness for our aging infrastructure and aging assets, but then also be able to meet future demands for service for the Coast Guard.
And I believe you need more money. I believe almost every element of American defense and Homeland Security needs more money, as we have more and more threats from overseas and from neighbors in Central America. But we have to realize as Congresspeople that things cost money, and the continuing resolution hurt you. When we had not approved the budget for next year, y'all were operating with less funds, and it affected your abilities. We need to be willing to take the difficult votes to pass revenue measures to serve our defense teams, our Homeland Security teams, and protect our country. Just putting out jingoistic comments about America and protect us and close our border and build walls and all that kind of stuff doesn't get it. It takes, yes, I vote for the budget, or I will vote for additional funds. That's what we need in so many areas, and I'm going to be willing to do it. I know in cybersecurity there's going to be a whole lot more, and you've got trouble dealing with Silicon Valley wanting to take a lot of people you probably want to serve in this important area. These ports are vulnerable, and cyber is a future warfare. So I just hope you'll quietly let your voices be known to folks that they need to support funding and not just rhetoric. Thank you for your service. I know what happened in Baltimore is being dealt with, and I guess anything could happen. Mr. Jimenez mentioned that. I don't expect ISIS or somebody to get a gigantic cargo container and have lots of containers on it and be able to bring down a bridge. But they could do something, and you're responsible. So we want to give you the funds to be able to do the job. Thank you, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back.
Sir, what is the liability of a shipping company, and maybe Mr. Fowler would be appropriate, I'm not sure who would be the right person, right now when there's a disaster like such as happened in Baltimore? Are there limits on liability in statute?
Thank you for your question. I appreciate that. I'd like to follow up with you after about the specifics, and I can get our staff involved to make sure that we're providing you the adequate results on that.
Well, my staff can do that for me afterwards. But for right now, tell me what your liability is.
So our liability would be to respond, and so we have contracts in place that would ensure that in the event that we would respond accordingly. Take for example in this particular instance you're referring to in Baltimore, they had salvage contracts and responding contracts already in place, so that immediately in hours after those salvage responders were immediately responding to that incident. I know that because we were in communication with some of our services to offer our services and support to do that. So that there is what's going on in Baltimore is a joint effort, and beyond there's ship owner plays a part, but absolutely we would have the responsibility to respond and would do that proactively.
How about, I mean, I thought I read there were damages, and there was a limitation on damages because of some old statute. If this shipping company was negligent, what's the liability?
Thank you again, Congressman. I'll come back with some more details, the specifics of that. And
all right, well, I'll find out from my staff, but what I'm getting at is there's liability, could be liability on the companies, and there shouldn't be limitations that are on some ancient law. The limitations, if there are any at all, they ought to be current, but we shouldn't give a free pass to the maritime industry if they are negligent in causing a damage to a bridge or other facility that causes an injury to a port, which causes an economic injury to the community. So we'll look into that. Is there any particular port, Mr. Wong, in your opinion, that's more vulnerable than another right now?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. I think, as the Coast Guard alluded to this morning, they do risk assessments with ports every single day. Our port here in Miami is vulnerable as well. We continuously train, we drill for response and active mitigation for what we can control. But to answer your question more precisely, I do think every port has specific critical infrastructure that will hinder their operations. Here at Port Miami, we're a 522-acre island. We have 2 points of access through our bridge, which is critical, and through our tunnel, which is another critical infrastructure. But as far as our waterways, we have one single inbound and outbound channel. It is not a two-way channel. So when a parade of vessels are going in, they're going in. When a parade of vessels going out, it's singled out. We recently, last November, had an issue where we had a downed recreational vessel strike a barge. She did go down in the channel. There was one fatality in the channel. The response was we had 5 cruise vessels cutting water, standing by to come in. We had thousands of passengers coming inbound, thousands of passengers on hold on the outbound, and 3 container vessels as well. So when you talk about planning, mitigation, Coast Guard, our local sheriffs, our community here, as port stakeholders, we drill, we take it very seriously to react as quickly as possible.
Thank you, Mr. Wong.
Yes, sir.
Mr. McCarthy, you mentioned safety as being a paramount to port operations, which of course they are. Based on what you know so far, could anything been done differently with the Francis Scott Key Bridge? I read a lot about some kind of supports they could have put around the pylons, and that would have diffused the impact. Could that have happened? And
I'm not privy to the details of the Francis Scott Key Bridge. I can talk about what's going on in Georgia. Around the Sidney Lanier Bridge, which is down in Brunswick, Georgia, there are actually 2-acre rock walls around the abutment of the bridge to protect the stanchions of the bridge down in Sidney Lanier Bridge down in Brunswick.
Were they constructed at the time of when the bridge was constructed, or were they added later?
I'll have to get back to you on the details of that question.
Do you know how old that bridge is, approximately?
I do not. I'll have to get back to you on that as well.
Because that was an issue about, I think they said they could have gone back in Baltimore and reinforced those stanchions, but it hadn't been done. Do you know of situations, anybody on the panel know of situations where folks have gone back and fortified the stanchions to guard against a potential strike?
I am not.
I think Tampa, the incident in 1980,
Yeah.
they actually did. But there are other cases, I'm sure, that just not in the top of my mind right now.
There was something that happened in New Orleans some years ago. I'm not quite sure what it was. A friend of mine was an NTSB back in the 90s, and he said after that there was a need for major study, and it was mandated by Congress, and it never took place. Can you edify us on that, Mr. Sadler?
I'm not surprised. I'm not familiar with the specifics of that, but I'm not surprised that other issues, other priorities at the time intervened to make it not possible, too expensive, not urgent.
Thank each of you for what you do, and thank you, Mr. Wong, for being the first person to recognize me today. Appreciate that very much. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Alabama yields back. The gentleman from Tennessee is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have been despairing the state of our country, but even more so the state of this committee and the judiciary for the last several months. This committee is becoming the Eileen Cannon Committee, the Trump-anointed group to support him and defend him for conduct that is not defensible, and the roadblocks in the path of justice where he should be on trial in Florida for his keeping classified records. He didn't declassify them, he just kept them. This is a man who several of our colleagues went to New York and said that our rule of law was false, that this case in New York was political and shouldn't have taken place. The thing we're most respected for around the world is the rule of law. People envy us for our rule of law. And to have people who know better go and trash it is despicable, almost treasonous. And then this committee, the hypocrisy that this committee would question Merrick Garland, who appointed a Republican to look into President Biden's conduct. A man who Mr. Hersh said, and he was here to be questioned. Anybody here could have questioned him about the conduct of what Mr. Biden said and why he came to that conclusion. But he said he was a sympathetic elderly man with a poor memory. The fact that he was sympathetic is why he would not be convicted. As distinguished from his forthcoming opponent and past opponent, who is a despicable, mendacious man with a poor knowledge of history and government and a poor memory to boot. A man who his own Secretary of State said was a moron. Yes, Tillerson said he was a moron. Kelly said he admires, John Kelly, his chief of staff, said he admires autocrats and dictators and has no conception of the rule of law or concern for it or for democracy in our country. His defense secretary, Mark Esper, said he was a threat to democracy. John Bolton declared him to be unfit to be president. And, of course, Mike Pence said they had profound differences. All folks coming up here and defending what's going on in New York. This is a man who had just his wife gave birth to his child, and he was playing golf and fornicating in Nevada rather than being with his wife and his newborn child. What an example we have for the American public and for young people. Joe Biden is, as Colin Yost said at the correspondence dinner, a decent man. He's sympathetic and a decent man. And the idea, one of the gentlemen said, we're in an impeachment hearing. We're not in an impeachment inquiry. These are just things they've thrown out there to try to take the facts away that he was twice impeached and to try to impeach
Would the gentleman yield?
Biden and Mayorkas. Both were wrong. And the hypocrisy that almost, I think every Republican on this committee voted against holding Barr in contempt, and that one of our members, my friend, the chairman, was cited for contempt because he refused to appear before a committee dealing with January 6th and the overthrow of the government. The hypocrisy is voluminous, and I yield to Mr. Nadler.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I just want to point out that the discussion we heard before about best evidence and so forth between Mr. Armstrong and Mr. Ivey is fit for a criminal trial. But this is not a criminal trial. This is a dispute between the executive branch and Congress. And in such a dispute, Congress must show a need for the evidence that we seek. Republicans have not made that showing. They've shown no need for these files. So the discussion we heard before is irrelevant because it was dealing with a criminal trial. This is not a criminal trial. This is a dispute between the executive branch and Congress. In such a dispute, Congress must show a need for the evidence that they seek. Republicans have not made that showing. They have not shown any need for these files, and that renders this whole thing ridiculous. And I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I yield back to him.
Thank you. In my last 10 seconds, all I can say is God bless America, because we need somebody of that authority to bless us with the way this committee and these folks have dealt with this case and ruining a constitution and democracy.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Since the discussions drifted into the Manhattan trial, I just have to say that it's ironic to hear my colleague from California speak to the integrity of our legal system. Like most Americans, I am appalled that our justice system could become so dangerously politicized. It started with the IRS harassing members of the Tea Party years ago. Then we had the FBI and intelligence agencies using what they knew was a completely fabricated story by the Clinton campaign over Russian collusion. My colleague played a large role in that and was censured by the House for his role in it. Then we had the intelligence agencies concoct a lie that the Hunter Biden laptop was a Russian hoax, and that may have decisively affected the outcome of the 2020 election. And now we have these sham cases against Donald Trump on the flimsiest of legal grounds that have never been charged before, and with the obvious intent to interfere massively with the presidential campaign. The sinister nature of these cases is that it doesn't matter that they're falling apart. That's not the point. The point is to drain Trump of his time and resources and throw the election to the Democrats. Now, the cornerstone of our justice system is equal justice under law, that no matter who we are, we're treated the same. That's why justice is depicted as blindfolded. And in each of these cases, there seem to be three standards of justice, one for Donald Trump, one for the rest of us, and then one for the Democrats. And that strikes at the heart of the matter before us, the decision to prosecute Donald Trump for mishandling classified documents and the decision not to prosecute Joe Biden for the same offense. Now, executive privilege is an important concept, has an enormous bearing on the separation of powers. The discussion, in fact, it goes back to George Washington's administration. And the discussions that a president has with his advisors or subordinates in the executive branch on any matter within the powers of his office are no more the business of the legislative branch than the discussions among members of Congress are the business of the executive. The president cannot compel Congress to divulge its deliberations any more than Congress can compel the president. So it's crystal clear to me that any official discussion between the president and any subordinate cannot be pierced. But this case is very different because it's not a conversation between the president and a subordinate over policy or the discharge of his official duties. Rather, it's an interview in the course of a criminal investigation. To me, this is far closer to the Nixon tapes. The Nixon tapes were not conversations as part of a criminal investigation, but conversations that had bearing on one. The conversation in this case is even further from the root of the executive privilege. This was an interview in a criminal investigation that clearly falls within the legitimate legislative function. It's not only a legitimate inquiry, it's a vital inquiry. How is it that there are two cases involving the handling of classified information that have been treated so radically differently? As President Donald Trump had absolute authority to declassify material at will, as Vice President, Joe Biden did not. Under the Presidential Records Act, President Trump had absolute discretion to determine what papers to retain in the course of his presidency. As Vice President, Joe Biden did not. And yet a decision was made to prosecute Donald Trump and yet not to prosecute Joe Biden by the Joe Biden administration. So it bears repeating. The foundation of our judicial system is equal justice under law. Without this, the law loses its moral authority. It simply becomes raw political force. And it's apparent to me that we are moving dangerously away from this principle of equal justice. Congress has an essential role to play in setting things right before we lose the very principles that define us as a free people. And central to this is to understand why these two cases were treated so very differently. The request of the administration is legitimate, and the contempt citation for its refusal to provide this information is entirely appropriate. And with that, I yield back.
Well said. The gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California. I have California, then I'll come there. The gentleman from California, Mr. Lewis, recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The House Judiciary Committee is responsible for helping to ensure the rule of law. Unfortunately, the actions of this committee chairman in ignoring a bipartisan congressional subpoena has hurt the ability of this committee to get information and hurt the rule of law. It is a height of hypocrisy for the chairman of this committee to try to enforce a contempt subpoena against Merrick Garland when this chairman himself ignored a bipartisan congressional subpoena. Now, I've been to a number of proceedings in my time in Congress and in the state legislature that have been relatively stupid. But this proceeding goes beyond stupidity. It is a waste of taxpayer resources. Why is that? Because we have the transcript. We have the transcript of the interview between Special Counsel Robert Hur and President Biden. There's no evidence whatsoever that this transcript was made up, that it's fake, that it's been doctored. This transcript was produced by Robert Hur's office. Robert Hur was appointed by Donald Trump. He is a Republican appointee. The notion that somehow this transcript is fake is a wild, insane conspiracy theory. You know what I think is really going on? Joe Biden stutters. He's always had a stuttering problem. He was made fun of as a child because he stuttered. He was bullied as a kid because he stuttered. He overcame stuttering to become president of the United States. And Republicans in the past have used his stuttering to smear him. I think that's what they want to do again with this audio. I think that is despicable. And if Republicans are going to go low, I am going to punch back. So let's talk about Donald Trump. I agree with the Republican from New Jersey who said if a person cannot stand trial, he should not be president of the United States. Donald Trump has fallen asleep multiple times at his own criminal trial. I am a former prosecutor. I can tell you that is not normal. I think there may be some physical and mental health issues that should be investigated. I'm going to tell you what people in the courtroom are writing about Donald Trump falling asleep. Here's a reporter who has been observing this. One reporter observed, quote, that Donald Trump has nodded off a few times, his mouth going slack and his head drooping onto his chest, end quote. Another reporter said, quote, that Donald Trump slowly dropped his head. His eyes closed, it jerked back upward, he adjusts himself, then his head droops again, he straightens up, leaning back, his head droops for a third time, he shakes his shoulders, eyes closed still, his head drops, end quote. If a person is so weak and feeble, if Donald Trump is so weak and feeble, he cannot stay awake at his own criminal trial, he can't be president of the United States. So instead of going around trying to smear different people, why don't we work on a bipartisan basis on issues that matter to the American people? Like, how about let's do a bipartisan hearing and let's do some bills to fix a broken immigration system. But the Republicans here don't want to do that. They don't want to work on a bipartisan basis. They don't want to fix this. Why? Because Donald Trump told them not to. Well, okay, so how about another issue? Let's talk about high prices. Prices are high. We did get a good report yesterday that inflation has now slowed down. That is good, but prices are still high. Why don't we work on bipartisan basis to look at price gouging? We have companies making record profits. They're gouging consumers. Let's have a hearing on that. Why don't we have a hearing on that? Because Republicans don't want to fix this issue. They want it as a campaign issue. Okay, then how about let's do a topic that isn't a campaign issue. Artificial intelligence has now become prevalent in many places. It could have privacy implications. It could do amazing things. It could also harm us in a variety of ways in terms of bias and so on. Why don't we do a hearing on this in this committee? Why don't we do that? Instead, we're here doing this stupid stuff to try to get audio of a transcript we already have. And it gets even worse than that. There is a second committee. The Oversight Committee is going to do an exact same hearing on this contempt proceeding. Let me just put in that, you know what, at least the chairman of that committee did not ignore a congressional bipartisan subpoena. It might be more appropriate for that committee to do it, and we should end this proceeding right now. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from...
All right, Mr. Cohen, you may begin. We can restart the clock at 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. What bothers me with this hearing, I think the hearing is good that we're having it on the issue, and I think the discussion's been great and the witnesses are great. But there's been anti-Semitism in this country and in the world for a long, long time. In the world, I guess 2,000 years, give or take, and in the United States, probably since the beginning of this country. And most of it has come from right-wing, racist crowds like the Ku Klux Klan, the Proud Boys, other groups that stand for nationalism. And they were the groups that were at Charlottesville and said, Jews will not replace us, and marched with their torches. They're the people that have consistently been the David Dukes and been anti-Semitic. And yet, when those things happen, people that are really against anti-Semitism, and those of us who are Jewish and feel it in a personal way so many times, didn't feel support from many, many, many people who today are some of the strongest people fighting anti-Semitism. Now, when they fight it, they are really fighting higher education. And they've always had a problem with that. I know a senator who said higher education is a cesspool. Well, obviously it's not, but that says something about her education. We ought to fight anti-Semitism in every quarter in which it exists. And what's happening now on the campuses is despicable and unfortunate. And so many of these people, including many of those who just left us and with their red hands and voices, don't understand the history of why Israel was created, why there's a necessity for Israel, and why it needs to exist. Ignorance has given them a lot of opportunity to make their voices heard. It needs to stop, but I think, and what I'd ask Dr. Goldfeder, and I know you've been at Emory, I don't think you're necessarily as Southern as that far back, but you get a taste of it in Atlanta. Is anti-Semitism more prevalent among Klansmen and Proud Boys and some of these right-wing groups?
I'm Emory by way of New York. But thank you for the question, Congressman. It's an excellent question. I'll answer that by saying that I think that anti-Semitism, it's hard to measure where it's more prevalent. It's dangerous wherever it comes from. But I think it is more dangerous coming from the left right now because it is okay to say it in polite society. No one thinks it's okay to say, I stand with David Duke or with the Klan. But people are willing to literally say, I stand with Hamas. And that's why it's more dangerous, because you can say it in polite society on university campuses.
Well, President Trump said he thought David Duke was okay when he ran for office in 2016, and he said he didn't know about all that other stuff, and he welcomed David Duke's support. But that's neither here nor there. A lot of the issues, and I don't mean to defend it in any way whatsoever, but has anybody out here, any one of you done any studies to see how much Saudi money or Kuwaiti money or Qatari money is been given to the schools, the Ivy schools in particular? I mean, dollars, I think, might have something to say, because I've read that there's a lot of Middle Eastern money gone into these universities and that they're afraid to lose it. Yes, sir, Rabbi?
I didn't do the study, but there was research done by the Institute for the Study of Global Anti-Semitism and Policy that found that from 2015 to 2020, institutions that accepted money from the Middle Eastern donors had, on average, 300% more anti-Semitic incidents than those institutions that did not. And from 2015 to 2020, institutions that accepted undisclosed funds from authoritarian donors had on average 250% more anti-Semitic incidents than those institutions that did not.
Anybody else have anything to add? Mr. Jacoby?
This was a report done by the Network Contagion Research Institute that invested Qatari money funneling into U.S. universities. The report clearly states, and I quote, "There has clearly been an erosion of democratic norms on campuses, and that a massive influx of foreign concealed donations to American institutions of higher learning, much of it from authoritarian regimes with notable support from Middle Eastern sources." That was the direct quote from the study.
And they generally are, those countries are generally aligned with Hamas.
I can tell you from my own experience, I'm a political science and modern Middle East studies major. I've yet to take a class in all 4 years of college that depicts the United States in any sort of positive light. And much of the professors that are saying things like playing the victim is what Jews are best at are the ones in the political science and modern Middle East studies department at Penn.
Well, I thank each of you. Both students are very impressive, and the adults are super adults are very impressive too. And I appreciate the hearing, but I do hope that we'll have more consistency in our opposition to anti-Semitism. I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This week, the person who occupied the White House for 4 years before President Biden returned to Washington for the first time since he left. Since that time, he's been found guilty of sexual abuse with E. Jean Carroll, and he's been found in defamation of E. Jean Carroll on 2 different occasions for nearly $100 million. He's been found to be fraudulently projecting his income and liabilities in his businesses in New York and the state, and to the tune of about $480 million civil judgment. He's also been found guilty of a felony in New York State 34 times. But also, what he did before he left was he led an assault on this Capitol, on this government. I was up there in the balcony when they were beating on the doors, and we were told to get out for our lives and put on gas masks. Gunfire was in this room. 4 officers were killed or died because of that insurrection against our government. Trump didn't come here to apologize to the Capitol Police, which he should have, put their lives on the line. It's unfortunate. I yield back the balance of my time.
Chair Wood. Back. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Tennessee.
Thank you, Mr. Jordan. Thank you for your attendance here today, General Garland. I'm a little perplexed here. I'd like to ask you a few questions. They've raised the fact that this is the first time that there's been a prosecution of a president that's allegedly gone after his opponent. Has there ever been another time in American history when a president was involved in an insurrection trying to overthrow the government of the United States of America other than January 6th?
The answer is no, but I do not intend to comment on the charges in the prosecution of the former president any more than I would comment on Mr. Herr's report. I just am not going to comment on matters that are before courts.
Thank you. It was said, somebody quoted, that one of the reasons there was no indictment of President Biden on records, classified records, was because he was considered a sympathetic character. In the Trump case, did anybody consider him a sympathetic character?
Again, I'm going to fall back on my respect for the court process, on the fact that cases are in court judges, and I'm just not going to, I just can't comment.
Mr. Jordan, in his opening comments, commented on the execution of the search warrant and said it was different in all these different ways. How many classified documents were found pursuant to that search warrant? And how many times had there been an attempt to get those classified documents and they'd been refused to return?
So I don't know that, I don't have in my head the number. That's all on the public record, including the number of times that efforts were made to obtain through legal process the documents.
This whole hearing is about weaponization of the Justice Department and the suggestion that there was somehow your department was involved in the prosecution of Donald Trump in the state court in New York. As far as weaponization of the department goes, did the Justice Department indict Senator Menendez?
It's a matter of public record, yes.
And he's a Democrat, isn't he?
I'm assuming the answer is yes.
And Henry Cuellar, Justice Department indicted him. He's a Democrat too,
Again,
isn't he?
It's a matter of public record.
So you've prosecuted Democrats, and as we speak, Hunter Biden, who is the son of the president, is under trial in Delaware. And so you haven't weaponized the Justice Department in terms of hiding and protecting Democrats Menendez, Cuellar, and Hunter Biden.
The Justice Department follows the facts and the law. We prosecute like cases alike, and we make decisions about different cases in different ways. We do not allow the political party or the ethnicity or the religion or the race or the wealth or the influence of someone we're investigating to make a difference in our charging decisions.
I noticed Mr. Gates, who took you on first, is not here now. And that's unfortunate because he is living testament to the fact and direct evidence that you have not weaponized the Justice Department. He was investigated for sex trafficking, and while many expected a prosecution, you chose not to prosecute this very active Republican. Is that true? You did not prosecute him?
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what is in the public record and what's not, so I'm just not going to comment on that.
Violent crime in urban areas is decreasing, and I thank you for that. Unfortunately, Memphis is not one of the cities where we've seen violent crime being reduced, but we're working on it. It was the second city to join the Violent Crime Initiative, which increases federal resources in specific communities. And I thank you for getting your department involved in trying to reduce murders and violent crime in our city, my city. Resources have been helpful based on my conversations with our U.S. Attorney and our District Attorney, and I want to thank you for that. Can you share some of the department's successes in tackling violent crime?
Well, yes, as I said in my opening, and I want to be clear, these are not the Justice Department's successes, these are the country's successes. The success in fighting violent crime relies on our partnership with state and local law enforcement, which really face violent crime the most directly. We operate in support of them and in our ability to bring technological tools and statutes to the fight that they may not have available.
My time's almost up. I just want to mention one thing. I read yesterday that the chairman of the committee wants to reduce funding to the Justice Department, and particularly certain areas. That would be defunding the Justice Department and defunding the opportunity to go after reducing violent crime. And I'm shocked. I yield back the balance of my time.
Gentlemen, excuse me, gentlemen yields.
One more question in, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you.
The vote
Follow to
has
Secretary
started.
Buttigieg. Thank you for coming, Secretary. I appreciate your coming and testifying, and it's always good to see you and discuss America's needs and Memphis's needs, which are America's needs, as you well know. Your department and your leadership have made tireless efforts and been instrumental in advancing our infrastructure. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, we've had most significant investment in infrastructure in decades, addressing critical needs in our roads, bridges, transit systems, and more. I thank you and President Biden and those that voted for this bill. It's several discretionary grant programs such as the Rebuilding America Infrastructure and Sustainability Equity discretionary grant program, RAISE, important. Just funded a program which I appreciate in my district that completed the Wolf River Greenway, a 26-mile pedestrian and bicycle path that needed to be completed, and it's a great opportunity for people to get exercise and get away from some communities and get into better natural surroundings. And we passed almost unanimously, not unanimously, with great bipartisan support, the FAA reauthorization. Those improvements were needed yesterday, but we've got them now. Let me ask you about the I-55 bridge. I know you've heard from multiple stakeholders in my district about the bridge investment program to replace the I-55 bridge. Only 2 bridges cross the Mississippi River in Memphis, one of which you came to Memphis to see, the I-40, when it was closed for several months because of problems and basically caused by Arkansas not expecting it well. But now it's clear we need a new bridge. This was built at a time when there were not, before the interstate highway system, so it didn't have any interstate highway levels of protection and stats, and it was before we had seismic vulnerabilities for older bridges. The bridge investment program is very competitive, I understand, but this is an important bridge for America. Can you give us any idea of when the FHWA ratings will be shared with applicants and when funding might be announced.
Thank you. As you noted, I had an opportunity to see for myself the critical importance of the I-55 bridge, both for individuals and for America's supply chains. And we're conscious that that bridge project has approached the department in the Bridge Investment Program. Right now, Federal Highway is going through its process with a preliminary review and rating, and then a dialogue with applicants that gives them an opportunity to supplement their applications based on anything they've learned. We reached out to Tennessee's DOT earlier this year to provide some of that feedback and then continue that process. I also want to note that any highly recommended or recommended bridge project application that doesn't give an award in the year when it comes in will be automatically carried forward for consideration under the next fiscal year unless they opt out. In terms of timing, we're working through it right now for the 23-24 cycle, hoping to make a round of awards later on this summer, and again, very conscious of the importance of that particular opportunity for the community in the region.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Passenger rights has been an important part of my service on this committee, and I know you've done a lot with it, and I thank you for your recent rules on fee transparency and cash refunds for flight cancellations. What do the implementation timelines and enforcement of these rules look like?
So the rulemakings each have their own clock, typically 6 months or less to comply, although I will note that the refund provisions that were included in the FAA reauthorization go into effect right away. And so it's simply a matter of us aligning the mechanisms to be able to do so, which we're working to do promptly. We are proud of our record on passenger protection. We know there's always more work to do as well. And so we're continuing rulemakings on topics like making sure that you don't have to pay extra to sit next to your kid on a flight, and looking into the issue of compensating passengers for extreme delays, in addition
extra
to
for not sitting next to somebody else's kid? Let me ask you about the airplane seat sizes, which is something I've worked on for many, many years. They've gotten smaller and more crowded. There were 26,000 comments about the discomfort of current seat sizes. Given your recent efforts to improve the passenger experience, nothing could be more important than a comfortable seat. Can you assure us that seat width and pitch will not get smaller?
We continue to assess what our authorities might be in this regard. I can certainly assure you as a frequent flyer that I've experienced the squeeze you're describing. Of course, in order for us to undertake a regulatory action, it would need to align with one of our statutory authorities. FAA has looked into some of the safety implications of that.
Let me just ask you this. When they do the study, last time they didn't have anybody over 60 or 65 and nobody under 18, nobody with a disability, nobody with a dog. Can you make sure it looks like the flying public? That was an absurd test they did.
We're conscious of the limitations under the study that was run before, and we'll certainly hold that in mind in going into any future study.
My last thing, just to throw it out, safe streets. Memphis was unfortunately first in pedestrian deaths, and we need more safe streets money. And we want to, I know you're dying to ride the train from Memphis to Nashville to Atlanta, and I look forward to doing it with you. I yield back the balance of my time.
Likewise.
Mr. Chairman, I recognize the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Fentanyl is a problem. Do you have any idea what percentage of fentanyl comes into this country through trucks coming from South America, airplanes coming from other countries, or by immigrants bringing it in their purses?
Thank you for the question, sir. I don't have any breakdown, but we can work on that and get you some follow-up information.
Do you have any idea at all? Does most of it come by one way or another? Does it come by trucks coming in, or by people coming in, or by airplanes, or what?
It's coming in various ways: trucks, consignment hubs. I'd be a lot more comfortable getting back to some definitive information as to if we can put some figures to that. I think it'd be much more accurate. I want to give you accurate information.
I don't need it to the exact number. I just want a ballpark figure. Can you give me a guess? What's your best estimate? Which is the most likely source?
Again, sir, I don't want to guess.
I don't want you to guess. I want to use your information and give me your opinion based on your history of knowing where fentanyl comes from.
I can't say, sir. I'm sorry.
All right, that's ridiculous, but I'll let it go. women that have been brought into this country for sex slaves, where do they mostly come in from? Walk in from the border, come in on airplanes from Europe, come in by trucks, or where?
Thank you for that question, sir. Human trafficking and sex trafficking is a very important part of our portfolio. Sex trafficking victims are not necessarily, they can be foreign nationals, but they can also be U.S. citizens. It's not a crime against the border, it's a crime against the person. So many of the sex trafficking victims that we encounter are U.S. citizens. There are trafficking victims that come in from foreign countries as well. Labor trafficking is another very serious crime that we investigate.
How do the human trafficked people come into our country, the ones that aren't born here?
They can come in various ways through...
What is the main way they come in?
They can come in across our land border, ports of entry. They can come in on...
Well, I understand that. They can parachute in from a Chinese balloon, but what is the main way they come in?
I would say the land border, sir.
They come into the land borders. And do you think they come in on foot or in trucks or in vans?
Again, sir, I don't have specific statistics for you. I can get back to you with that information, however.
Do you work with companies like FedEx on trying to ferret out importation of drugs?
Correct, sir, and other contraband.
And do you have agents at FedEx in Memphis at their hub?
Yes, sir, we do.
And do y'all do a good job of inspecting packages that may be suspect to ferret out drugs?
We work collaboratively with CBP and our other partners to target. There is a large volume of parcels and shipments that come in, but we target extensively to better identify suspect packages and take contraband off the streets.
And do you do the same thing with UPS?
Yes, sir.
And with USPS?
Yes, sir.
Senator Scott, I understand, put in a bill or said he was going to put in a bill to require that Secret Service protection be the same for former presidents as they are for current presidents. Does it make any sense whatsoever for Jimmy Carter to have the same number of Secret Service agents as Mr. Trump?
I'd have to defer that to Secret Service, sir. That's really a question for them.
No, it's a question for you. I'm asking you. A man who's 100 years old, infirm, in a bed, can hardly get up. Does he need Secret Service protection to the same extent as Mr. Trump, who plays golf and goes around and speaks, and President Biden, who goes around and speaks?
I wouldn't like to make judgments.
I yield back the balance of my time.